In a quiet suburban neighborhood where every lawn was manicured to perfection and every mailbox aligned exactly with the next, the peace was rarely disturbed. Homes were painted in soft pastels, and driveways gleamed as if they had just been polished. The streets were a showcase of conformity, a place where deviation was quietly frowned upon or loudly punished by those who claimed to uphold order. Among these households lived a dog, large but gentle, with a coat that shone in the sunlight and eyes that seemed to hold a quiet intelligence. To most, he was the perfect companion, the kind of pet that brought joy without chaos. But to Karen, a neighbor who prided herself on her authority over appearances, he was nothing short of a menace. The tension began subtly. At first, there were sideways glances as the dog bounded happily across the lawn, chasing butterflies or simply enjoying the morning air. Karen, perched in her pristine garden, observed every movement, her frown deepening with every joyful leap. What others saw as harmless play, she perceived as a threat. The first formal complaint arrived via the HOA newsletter, phrased in clinical tones about safety hazards and liability concerns. The dog, it was claimed, was dangerous, unpredictable, and a negative influence on the neighborhood's pristine image. For the dog's owner, the accusations were bewildering. There had never been an incident, never a single moment of aggression. His calm demeanor, his careful obedience, and his consistent friendliness were well known to anyone who had interacted with him. Still, Karen persisted. Flyers appeared on mailboxes, warning of the aggressive dog next door. The language was exaggerated, dramatic, and crafted to instill fear. For weeks, he tried to ignore the complaints, believing that reason would prevail, that neighbors would see the truth. But Karen's persistence had other plans. The HOA meetings, once dull gatherings of policy discussions and budget approvals, became arenas of conflict. Karen dominated the conversations, recounting imagined encounters and exaggerating minor incidents into life-threatening scenarios. Her rhetoric was compelling to a few who had never interacted with the dog, and suddenly, a wedge began to form in the community. Some homeowners who had once admired the calm suburban order began to doubt. Petitions circulated, suggesting restrictive measures, leashes, and containment systems. The dog's owner found himself defending his companion not just to the HOA, but to neighbors who whispered doubts as they passed his yard. Despite the mounting pressure, there were allies. A few neighbors recognized Karen's pattern, her need to assert control, to create conflict where none existed. They spoke up discreetly, defending the dog's behavior, noting his gentle nature. But these voices were quieter, drowned out by the theatrics of complaints and the fearful murmurs of those easily swayed. It was a neighborhood slowly tilting toward paranoia, a small dog cast as a villain in a tale that only one person wanted to tell. The tension reached its peak one early morning. Children played on the sidewalks, riding bikes and laughing, unaware of the storm brewing nearby. Karen, wielding her authority like a weapon, claimed that the dog had lunged at a neighbor, a claim that was entirely fabricated. The HOA board convened immediately, letters were drafted, and discussions about possible removal began. The dog's owner felt the weight of injustice pressing down. He had followed every rule, ensured safety at all times, and maintained every legal requirement. Yet reason had no place in this battle. The narrative had been set, and for now, it seemed that Karen would win. And so, the quiet days of neighborhood harmony gave way to cautious glances and whispered judgments. The dog became a symbol of contention, a target of fear, and a pawn in a struggle he did not understand. The owner, though resolute, began to feel the creeping tension of isolation. Every walk felt like an accusation, every wag of a tail a statement under scrutiny. The idyllic streets, once a haven of calm, were now charged with anticipation. Something was about to happen that would shift the balance entirely, though no one could foresee it. Little did anyone know, the dog's defining moment was approaching, an event that would not only vindicate him but also reverse the course of the neighborhood's opinion entirely. Karen's authority, once unquestioned, would soon be challenged in a way that the community could not ignore. The tension was mounting, and the calm before the storm was only the beginning of what was to come. The stage was set, the players positioned, and the neighborhood braced itself for the incident that would change everything. The dog remained oblivious to the growing tension, as dogs often are, guided by instinct, loyalty, and a sense of timing that humans rarely anticipate. The days after the latest HOA complaints were tense. Whispers traveled faster than the morning breeze. Neighbors peeked out of their windows, scanning the yard as though expecting disaster at any moment. Karen walked her route of scrutiny like a vigilant warden, checking that every sidewalk, every lawn, and every child was safe from the alleged menace next door. The dog, unaware of the growing tension, continued his routine, chasing squirrels, lounging under trees, and greeting visitors with the boundless loyalty only a dog could offer. Yet fate was about to thrust him into a position that would forever alter the neighborhood's perception. It happened one late afternoon when the golden light of the sun stretched long shadows across the cul-de-sacs. Children were playing near the end of the street, their laughter echoing across driveways. A small child, only 5 or 6, wandered slightly too far, chasing a balloon that had escaped a playmate's hand. The street, usually calm, suddenly presented danger. A speeding car, its driver distracted and unaware, barreled down the stretch, oblivious to the child in its path. The scene, for any casual observer, was a nightmare unfolding in real time. The dog, who had been resting lazily near the front porch, reacted instinctively. He sprinted with astonishing speed, his focus singular, his loyalty unwavering. In seconds, he reached the child, placing his body firmly between them and the oncoming vehicle. The driver, startled, slammed the brakes and swerved, narrowly avoiding catastrophe. The child's parents, frozen in terror moments before, now embraced their child with relief that bordered on disbelief. It was a near miracle, and the hero of the moment was not a person, but a dog who had been labeled dangerous, aggressive, and unpredictable. News spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. What had been a source of tension, the dog that Karen had relentlessly condemned, was now the subject of awe, gratitude, and admiration. Neighbors who had once whispered doubts now praised the dog openly. Children ran to pat him, adults lined the sidewalks with cameras and phones, and even those who had been firmly in Karen's camp found themselves unable to deny the facts. Evidence was irrefutable. The dog had acted to protect life without hesitation or fear. Karen, of course, reacted differently. The heroism of the dog clashed violently with her narrative of danger and menace. For weeks, she had framed him as a liability, a threat to safety. And now the community saw the undeniable truth. The very act she had anticipated as proof of danger became her undoing. Her frustration grew as neighbors openly thanked the dog's owner, posted videos online, and shared the story with local groups. Her attempts to reassert control were met with laughter, derision, and subtle ridicule. She had set out to warn the neighborhood, but the warning had backfired spectacularly. The HOA meetings that followed the incident were surreal. Instead of discussing fines, restrictions, or complaints, the board and community members focused on celebrating the dog's heroism. Awards were suggested, recognition plaques were discussed, and ideas to formally acknowledge his bravery circulated. The dog, once a symbol of fear in Karen's narrative, became a symbol of courage, loyalty, and protection. Neighborhood children adorned him with handmade medals and painted signs, thanking him for saving one of their own. Social media posts of the incident went viral locally, spreading to nearby neighborhoods and beyond, turning a small suburban story into a sensation. Karen's influence began to erode visibly. Her critiques now carried no weight. Her warnings, were met with eye rolls and gentle amusement. Even neighbors who had previously been neutral observed the shift in power. The narrative she had tried to control slipped entirely from her hands, replaced by a new story. The dog who saved a child, the hero who defied false accusations, and the family who had maintained faith in him. The balance of authority in the neighborhood was tipping, and the consequences were personal for Karen. Her reputation, carefully curated over years of HOA participation, began to unravel. Meanwhile, the dog continued his routine as if nothing had changed. He still greeted visitors with wagging tails and gentle eyes, still played in the yard, and still lounged in the sun. The transformation, however, was in the eyes of the humans around him. Where once suspicion and fear lingered, now admiration and respect dominated. Children who had once been wary now followed him eagerly, and adults who had doubted now shared stories of his bravery with pride. The neighborhood had shifted its allegiance, and Karen's voice, once authoritative, became a whisper drowned out by celebration. By the end of the week, the incident had cemented itself as a turning point. The dog was no longer a target, a nuisance, or a danger. He was the hero of the neighborhood, a living testament to instinct, loyalty, and courage. Karen, who had orchestrated complaints and manipulated fear, now faced the consequences of her false narrative. Isolation crept in, subtle but undeniable, as neighbors avoided her criticisms and instead discussed the hero dog with warmth and admiration. The atmosphere of fear she had cultivated was replaced by joy, gratitude, and communal pride. The neighborhood, once divided by accusation and control, had united around a simple truth. Heroism could not be fabricated, and integrity would always be recognized. Karen's story was no longer one of authority and dominance, but of a cautionary tale, a reminder that attempts to manipulate perception could be overturned by reality in an instant. The dog's actions had rewritten the rules of the street, shifting power, respect, and attention to where it rightfully belonged. As evening fell, the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the streets in a warm golden glow. Families gathered outdoors, sharing stories of the day, celebrating the bravery that had prevented tragedy, and thanking the dog who had acted without hesitation. Karen retreated indoors, isolated, her influence waning as the community's collective admiration for the dog grew. The stage was set for the next chapter of this neighborhood drama, a chapter that would see the final consolidation of the dog's heroic status and the complete reversal of Karen's reputation. The days following the incident were unlike anything the neighborhood had ever experienced. Where tension and whispered accusations had once defined interactions, laughter, pride, and admiration now filled the streets. The dog, who had been the subject of fear and false warnings, had become the central figure in a community transformed by gratitude. Children ran through yards calling his name with joy, and neighbors lingered on sidewalks to recount the story to anyone who would listen. Every movement, every playful bark, was now met with admiration rather than suspicion. Karen, however, remained a constant, unwillingly central figure in this new order. Her attempts to regain influence were futile. HOA meetings that once amplified. Her voice now barely tolerated her presence. Any complaint she raised, any cautionary note she tried to circulate, was met with polite dismissals, knowing smiles and subtle laughter. The community had shifted its allegiance, united by the undeniable heroism of the dog. The balance of power had fully reversed, and it was evident to all that Karen's authority had eroded completely. Local news outlets caught wind of the story, amplifying it further. Videos of the dog placing himself between the child and the speeding car went viral. Headlines celebrated the dog's bravery, with photos of the neighborhood gathering around him and families expressing gratitude. Social media posts tagged the street, the house, and the heroic pet, turning a quiet suburban tale into a phenomenon that transcended the cul-de-sac. The dog's owner, once weighed down by complaints and HOA politics, was now praised as a responsible and caring guardian. Every interaction became a testament to trust, community, and the natural heroism that often went unnoticed in everyday life. Karen's frustration grew with each passing day. Where she had sought control, she now faced public admiration for someone she had declared dangerous. Her warnings, once feared, were now regarded as baseless. Her credibility crumbled under the weight of reality. Attempts to isolate the dog or discredit his actions only made her appear petty and vindictive. Neighbors who had once maintained polite neutrality now actively sided against her, siding instead with the dog and his family. Her status as a powerful HOA figure was completely overturned, replaced by quiet disdain and social isolation. Meanwhile, the neighborhood celebrated. Children made drawings of the dog with capes, parents held small ceremonies of appreciation, and homeowners placed signs in their yards honoring the hero of the block. The dog, unaware of the social dynamics he had influenced, continued to behave, as he always had, gentle, obedient, and loyal. But his impact was undeniable. He had not only saved a child, but had also united a community and reshaped social hierarchies in the neighborhood. In every sense, he had become the hero not just of one incident, but of the entire block. Karen's attempts to retaliate were met with indifference. Letters, complaints, and reminders of rules were brushed aside. HOA discussions now focused on safety celebrations, community bonds, and recognition of responsible pet ownership. Where she had once dictated terms and enforced fear, she now watched silently from her perfectly manicured lawn as the neighborhood moved forward without her influence. Her warnings fell on deaf ears, and her presence became a cautionary tale of what happens when authority is wielded unjustly. Over time, the dog's fame only grew. Local newspapers ran features. Social media accounts dedicated to his heroism were created, and community awards were bestowed upon the family. New neighbors moved in, drawn by stories of the heroic dog and the welcoming, grateful community that had formed in his honor. The streets once dominated by whispered fears and HOA politics became lively spaces filled with friendship, joy, and shared pride. The dog, central to this transformation, continued his days with the same calm and playful demeanor, embodying the heroism that words and accolades could barely capture. Karen, on the other hand, became a figure of social isolation. The very behaviors that had once given her influence now only served to alienate her further. Children avoided her garden, neighbors waved politely but spoke little, and her warnings were met with quiet amusement or gentle disregard. Her attempts to regain control highlighted the contrast between fear and heroism, authority and integrity, manipulation and truth. The neighborhood had chosen, collectively and decisively, to celebrate courage over control. By the end of the story, the transformation was complete. The dog was recognized as a hero, not only by the family he had saved, but by the entire community. Karen's influence was diminished, her warnings disregarded, and her social standing permanently altered. The neighborhood had learned a lesson about loyalty, courage, and the power of action over accusation. Fear could not overshadow truth, and heroism, when it appeared in unexpected forms, could change perceptions and relationships forever. As the sun set over the now joyful cul-de-sac, the dog lay in the grass, paws stretched out, his eyes calm and watchful. Children waved as they rode by, neighbors stopped to pet him, and the family stood proudly, knowing that their companion had not only saved a life, but had strengthened the entire community. Karen retreated indoors, silent, watching a world that had moved on without her influence. The story of fear, complaint, and accusation had ended, replaced by one of heroism, gratitude, and neighborhood unity. The narrative of the street had shifted permanently. The dog had become the symbol of courage, the guardian of the community, and the living reminder that truth and loyalty always triumph over fear and manipulation. Karen's story was a footnote, a cautionary tale of power misused and authority lost. The neighborhood had a new hero, and his impact would be remembered for years to come.